Billionaire was celebrating Christmas with his new girlfriend when his ex arrived with their child. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. 3 years ago, Emily Carrington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Adrian Westfall's penthouse, watching the city lights blur through her tears. The reflection staring back at her was almost unrecognizable, a woman who had slowly disappeared into someone else's shadow. "You're being dramatic, Emily." Adrian's voice cut through the silence as he loosened his tie, exhaustion evident in every line of his powerful frame. At 38, he commanded boardrooms with the same intensity that had initially drawn her to him. Dark hair perfectly styled even after 14-hour days, sharp jaw set with determination, and those piercing green eyes that could make her forget her own name. Dramatic? Emily turned, her voice barely above a whisper. She tucked a strand of her shoulder-length chestnut hair behind her ear, a nervous habit he used to find endearing. "I haven't painted in 6 months, Adrian. 6 months. I used to live for my art." He pulled off his jacket, revealing the tailored white shirt that emphasized his broad shoulders. "You're supporting something bigger now. The charity gala needs—" "No." The word escaped stronger than she intended. "I'm not supporting anything. I'm disappearing." Adrian froze, his hands stilling on his cufflinks. The silence stretched between them like a chasm that had been growing for months. Emily remembered when that silence used to be comfortable, filled with understanding and stolen glances. Now it felt suffocating. What's that supposed to mean? His voice carried that edge she'd been hearing more often lately, the same tone he used with difficult investors. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the apartment's warmth. "When was the last time you asked me what I wanted for dinner? Or what I thought about anything that wasn't related to your business events? That's not fair, isn't it?" She turned back to the window, but this time she saw herself clearly in the reflection. "I quit my job to be available for your schedule. I moved into your world, adopted your friends, wore the clothes your stylist picked. I even changed my coffee order because you mentioned once that you found my choice too complicated." She heard his footsteps approaching, felt the familiar warmth of his presence behind her. Once, that closeness would have melted her resolve. Now it just reminded her how lost she'd become. His voice softened, and she could feel him struggling to find the right words. "You know I love you. Everything I'm building, it's for us." "No." She turned to face him, seeing the confusion in his eyes. "It's for you." And somewhere along the way I forgot there was supposed to be a me in this equation. Adrian's jaw tightened. "So what are you saying? You want to leave? Just like that? Just like that?" Emily's laugh came out broken. "Adrian, I've been drowning for months. I've tried talking to you, but every conversation turns into your next business meeting or social obligation. I feel like I'm suffocating in a life that doesn't fit me anymore. Then we'll change things." He stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers. "Cancel the stylist, paint again, whatever you need." But Emily stepped back, tears flowing freely now. "You don't understand. I don't even remember what I need anymore. I look in the mirror and don't recognize the woman staring back at me." The hurt that flashed across Adrian's face was immediate and devastating. "So you're just going to run away? I'm going to find myself again." Emily's voice strengthened with conviction she didn't know she still possessed. "My sister Maya is opening her art studio in Portland. She needs help setting up, and I need to remember who Emily Carrington is when she's not defined by being Adrian Westfall's girlfriend." "This is insane." Adrian ran his hands through his hair, messing up the perfect style. "We can work through this. People have rough patches. This isn't a rough patch." Emily moved toward the bedroom, her decision crystallizing with each step. "This is me realizing that love shouldn't require me to disappear." 20 minutes later, she stood by the door with a suitcase that contained only the clothes she'd worn before meeting him. Everything else, the designer dresses, the jewelry, even the perfume he'd chosen, belonged to a woman she no longer wanted to be. Adrian stood frozen in the living room, watching her like he couldn't quite believe what was happening. "I'll send for the rest of my things," Emily said, her hand on the doorknob. "Emily, wait." His voice cracked slightly. "Just tell me you'll call. When you figure things out, tell me there's a chance for us." She looked at him one last time, this man who had consumed her world so completely that she'd forgotten she had one of her own. The love was still there, overwhelming and painful, but it wasn't enough anymore. "Goodbye, Adrian." The door closed behind her with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot in the silence that followed. Neither of them could have imagined that by the time Emily found the courage to reach out 10 weeks later, Adrian's broken heart would have already built walls too high for her voice to climb. 3 years had transformed Emily Carrington in ways she never imagined possible. Standing in the small kitchen of her Portland apartment, she watched her daughter Hazel carefully stack wooden blocks while humming an off-key version of Jingle Bells. "Mama, look!" Hazel held up her creation, a wobbly tower that defied all laws of physics. At 2 years and 4 months, she possessed Adrian's intense focus and Emily's stubborn determination, though she had no idea where half her DNA had come from. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." Emily knelt beside her daughter, marveling at how those green eyes, so achingly familiar, sparkled with innocent joy. Hazel had Adrian's eyes, his strong jawline softened by childhood, and Emily's wild curls that refused to be tamed. The pregnancy had been the hardest thing Emily had ever endured. Alone in a new city, watching her body change while her heart remained broken, she'd spent countless nights wondering if she was strong enough to raise a child by herself. The anxiety had been overwhelming. Sleepless nights, racing thoughts, and a prescription for mild anti-anxiety medication that had barely taken the edge off her fears. But Hazel had changed everything. The moment Emily held her daughter for the first time, feeling that tiny heartbeat against her chest, she'd discovered a strength she never knew existed. "Mama sad?" Hazel's small hand touched Emily's cheek, bringing her back to the present. "No, baby. Mama's thinking." Emily smiled, smoothing down one of Hazel's rebellious curls. "Are you excited to meet Grandma and Grandpa tomorrow?" Hazel nodded enthusiastically, then immediately knocked over her block tower and giggled. Emily laughed too, the sound coming easier now than it had in those early months when every emotion felt too big for her body. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from her mother. "Can't wait to meet our granddaughter. Dad already baby-proofed the house twice. We're so proud of you, sweetheart." Emily's chest tightened with a familiar mix of gratitude and guilt. Her parents had been supportive when she'd finally told them about Hazel, though she could see the questions in their eyes. Questions about the father, about why she'd chosen to raise their granddaughter alone. She'd never told them about Adrian. How could she explain that she'd tried to contact him, only to discover he'd erased her from his life so completely, it was as if she'd never existed? How could she admit that sometimes, in her weakest moments, she wondered if his rejection was what she deserved for walking away in the first place? "Hazel, let's get you ready for your bath." Emily scooped up her daughter, inhaling the sweet scent of baby shampoo and Cheerios that always clung to her hair. As she filled the small bathtub, Emily caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back was stronger than the one who'd left Adrian's penthouse 3 years ago. Her face had a confidence that came from surviving something she'd never thought possible. Her body bore the beautiful marks of pregnancy and motherhood, stretch marks she'd learned to see as battle scars rather than flaws. She wore her chestnut hair longer now, natural waves falling past her shoulders. Her style had evolved too. Comfortable jeans, soft sweaters, clothes chosen for practicality and comfort rather than appearance. She was still beautiful, but it was a different kind of beauty, one that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she was capable of. "Bubbles!" Hazel squealed as Emily added bath soap to the water, her joy infectious and absolute. "Yes, bubbles for my silly girl." Emily settled onto the bathroom floor, watching Hazel play. These quiet moments had become sacred to her, just the two of them. No expectations or performance required. Her phone rang, Maya's name flashing on the screen. "Hey sis," Emily answered, putting it on speaker. "How's my favorite niece?" Maya's warm voice filled the bathroom. "She's destroying your carefully organized art supplies," Emily said, watching Hazel try to catch soap bubbles. "As is her birthright. Listen, I know you're nervous about going home, but you're ready for this." Emily was quiet for a moment. Maya had been her lifeline these past 3 years. Never judging, always supporting, helping Emily build a new life from the ground up. What if I run into him? The question had been haunting her for weeks. Then you run into him. You're not the same woman who left him. You're a mother now. You've built a life. You survived becoming a single parent in a new city with panic attacks and morning sickness. You learned to paint again. You're not the girl who lost herself in someone else's world. Emily looked at Hazel, who was now wearing a bubble beard and grinning like she'd invented comedy. You're right. Besides, what are the chances? Portland's a big city and it's Christmas. He's probably skiing in Aspen or on some yacht in the Caribbean. Exactly. And even if you did see him, you don't owe him anything. You tried to tell him about Hazel. That's on him for being unreachable. After hanging up, Emily finished Hazel's bath and got her ready for bed. As she read Goodnight Moon for the 100th time, her daughter's small hand curled around her finger, a gesture that never failed to make Emily's heart swell. "Mama," Hazel whispered sleepily. "Tomorrow airplane?" "Yes, baby. Tomorrow we go on an airplane to see Grandma and Grandpa." "And Santa?" Emily smiled. "Maybe Santa too." What Emily didn't know was that hundreds of miles away, Adrian Westfall was standing in his own apartment, now even more luxurious than before, staring at a Christmas invitation he'd been ignoring for weeks. The annual Hartwell Foundation Gala. The same gala where Portland's elite would gather to celebrate the season. The same gala that Emily's childhood friend Camilla had just convinced her to attend, promising it would be the perfect way to ease back into social situations after 3 years of self-imposed exile from her old world. Fate, it seemed, had a sense of irony about timing. Adrian Westfall adjusted his platinum cufflinks for the 3rd time, staring at his reflection in the marble-framed mirror of his penthouse bedroom. The man looking back at him was a far cry from the heartbroken fool who'd watched Emily walk out 3 years ago. Success had a way of changing everything, except the ache that still lived somewhere deep in his chest. "Adrian, darling, we need to leave in 10 minutes if we want to make the proper entrance." Vivian Clark's voice drifted from the living room, carrying that polished accent she'd perfected during her years in European boarding schools. He straightened his black Tom Ford tuxedo jacket and walked out to find her adjusting her diamond earrings in front of the hallway mirror. At 33, Vivian was undeniably stunning. Tall, blonde, with the kind of refined beauty that photographed perfectly for society pages. Everything about her was curated. Her vintage Chanel dress, her perfectly straightened hair, even her laugh had been practiced to hit the right notes. "You look beautiful," Adrian said, meaning it in the detached way he'd grown accustomed to meaning everything these days. Vivian smiled, but it was the kind of smile she'd give any compliment. Polite, expected, transaction complete. "Thank you. Did you remember to tell Marcus we'll need photos for my Instagram? The lighting at these events can be tricky." Adrian nodded, watching as she applied another coat of lipstick with surgical precision. This was their relationship in a nutshell, carefully choreographed moments designed for public consumption. Vivienne needed the prestige that came with dating a billionaire tech mogul. Adrian needed someone who understood that his heart wasn't available for rent. It was a perfect arrangement for 2 people who had given up on messy, complicated love. "The car's waiting," Adrian said, helping her with her coat, a gesture that felt automatic rather than intimate. The ride to the Hartwell Foundation Gala was filled with Vivian's commentary about who would be attending and which photographers would be worth posing for. Adrian half listened, his mind wandering to the quarterly reports he'd rather be reviewing. His company, Westfall Medical Technologies, had just secured its largest hospital contract to date. The success should have felt more satisfying. "Are you even listening to me?" Vivian's sharp tone cut through his thoughts. "Of course. You were saying something about the mayor's wife." Vivian studied him with cool blue eyes. "You've been distant lately, more than usual." Adrian looked out the window at the city lights blurring past. "Just business. It's always business with you." There was no hurt in her voice, just mild irritation. "Sometimes I wonder if you're even capable of letting anyone in anymore." The comment hit closer to home than Adrian cared to admit. 3 years ago, he'd been capable of feeling everything too intensely. Emily had accused him of not seeing her, but the truth was he'd seen her so clearly it terrified him. He'd built his walls higher after she left, and now even he wasn't sure how to scale them. "We're here," he said as the car pulled up to the grand entrance of the Hartwell estate. The mansion was transformed into a Christmas wonderland. Thousands of twinkling lights, towering evergreen trees, and the kind of elegant excess that made Portland's elite feel appropriately important. Adrian helped Vivian from the car, immediately surrounded by the flash of cameras and the practiced smiles of people who wanted something from him. Inside, the party was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over guests in designer gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos. A string quartet played classical Christmas music while servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that cost more per bite than most people's lunch. "Adrian, there's my favorite tech titan." Senator Hartwell approached with his wife, both beaming the kind of smile that meant they needed a donation. For the next hour, Adrian played his role perfectly, charming, engaged, writing mental checks for causes he barely cared about. Vivian glided beside him like the perfect political wife, laughing at the right moments and remembering everyone's names with impressive precision. But as the evening wore on, a familiar restlessness crept in. This wasn't his world. It was the world he'd built to replace the one Emily had taken with her when she left. Every conversation felt scripted, every interaction carefully calculated for maximum social benefit. "I need some air," Adrian murmured to Vivian, who was deep in conversation with the museum director's wife about charity auction items. "Don't be long, darling. The mayor wants to discuss that hospital expansion with you." Adrian stepped onto the mansion's grand terrace, breathing in the crisp December air. Portland spread out below him, twinkling like a jewelry box. He'd conquered this city in the 3 years since Emily left, building an empire that should have filled the hole she'd torn in his world. Instead, success felt hollow. Every achievement was something he wanted to share with someone who was no longer there to hear it. His phone buzzed, a text from his assistant about a conference call with Tokyo investors. Even at a Christmas gala, work followed him everywhere. Maybe that was for the best. Work didn't ask questions about feelings or demand vulnerability he was no longer capable of giving. "There you are." Vivian appeared beside him, wrapping her arm through his. "Ready to go back in? The dancing is about to start, and I promised Mrs. Hartwell we'd lead the first waltz." Adrian looked at her perfect smile, her perfectly styled hair, her perfectly appropriate response to every social situation. She was everything Emily hadn't been. Predictable, manageable, safe, and absolutely nothing like the woman who still haunted his dreams. "Of course," Adrian said, offering his arm. "Let's give them a show." What neither of them noticed was the car pulling up outside the mansion at that very moment, carrying a woman who had spent 3 years building a new life from the ashes of the old one, and the green-eyed little girl who was about to change everything. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down her deep emerald dress, a vintage piece she'd found at a consignment shop that made her feel like herself again. Hazel dozed peacefully in her arms, wearing a tiny red velvet dress that made her look like a Christmas angel. "Are you sure about this?" Camilla asked, adjusting her own silver gown as they approached the mansion's grand entrance. "We could still grab dinner somewhere quiet instead." "No." Emily's voice was stronger than she felt. "I need to do this. I can't hide forever just because he might be somewhere in the same city." The truth was, Emily had spent 3 years avoiding places Adrian might frequent. Tonight felt like reclaiming her own hometown, proving to herself that she could exist in the same space as her past without crumbling. "Besides," Emily added, shifting Hazel to her other hip, "what are the chances he'd be at a charity gala? He always hated these events." Camilla raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She'd been Emily's friend since high school and knew better than most how completely Adrian had once consumed Emily's world. The Hartwell mansion was even more spectacular than Emily remembered from her childhood visits. Her parents had brought her here for community events when she was younger, back when she'd dreamed of someday being elegant enough to belong in such places. Now, holding her daughter and wearing confidence she'd earned through sleepless nights and single motherhood, Emily realized she'd never needed to belong anywhere but in her own skin. "Breathe," Camilla whispered as they handed their coats to an attendant. "You look absolutely stunning and you're exactly where you deserve to be." The ballroom took Emily's breath away. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across marble floors, while hundreds of guests moved through the space like something from a fairy tale. Christmas trees towered in every corner, draped in gold and silver ornaments that caught the light like captured stars. Hazel stirred in Emily's arms, her green eyes opening wide at the spectacle. "Pretty," Hazel whispered, her small hand reaching toward the nearest chandelier. "Yes, sweetheart. Very pretty." Emily kissed her daughter's forehead, grateful for the anchor of Hazel's warm weight against her chest. They found a quiet corner where Emily could set up Hazel's small travel bag. She'd brought coloring books and quiet toys, hoping her daughter would be content for at least an hour. Several other guests had brought children, and Emily felt relieved that Hazel wouldn't be the only little one present. "Emily Carrington? Is that really you?" Emily turned to find Mrs. Henderson, her old piano teacher, beaming at her with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Henderson, how wonderful to see you." Emily's smile felt natural for the first time all evening. "And who is this beautiful little one?" Mrs. Henderson's eyes went straight to Hazel, who was now alert and curious about her surroundings. "This is my daughter, Hazel." "Hazel, can you say hello?" Hazel offered a shy wave before burying her face in Emily's shoulder, making Mrs. Henderson laugh with delight. For the next 20 minutes, Emily found herself swept into conversations with old family friends and acquaintances she hadn't seen in years. Everyone was charmed by Hazel, and Emily felt herself relaxing into the familiar warmth of her hometown community. "I'm going to get us some champagne," Camilla said during a lull in conversation. "Watch the Munchkin for a minute?" "Of course." Emily settled into a plush chair near the terrace doors, letting Hazel explore the contents of her toy bag on the carpet beside her. The string quartet began playing a waltz, and Emily watched as couples moved onto the dance floor. The scene was beautiful in its elegant simplicity. Men in black tuxedos, women in jewel-toned gowns, moving together in perfect harmony. That's when she saw him. Adrian stepped through the terrace doors, his arm linked with a stunning blonde woman Emily didn't recognize. 3 years had only made him more devastating. Broader shoulders, more confident bearing, the kind of presence that made conversation pause as he passed. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Time seemed to slow as her brain struggled to process what she was seeing. He was exactly as she remembered and completely different. More polished, more distant, more untouchable than ever. The blonde woman beside him was everything Emily had never been. Tall, perfectly styled, wearing confidence like an expensive accessory. She whispered something in Adrian's ear that made him smile, the kind of practiced smile Emily remembered from business dinners. "Mama?" Hazel's small voice brought Emily crashing back to the present. Her daughter was looking up at her with concern, somehow sensing her mother's distress. "It's okay, baby," Emily whispered, though her heart was pounding so hard she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. She needed to leave, now, before he saw her, before this perfect evening shattered into 1,000 pieces of unresolved history. Emily stood quickly, gathering Hazel's toys with shaking hands. But in her haste, she knocked over the small cup of juice she'd gotten for Hazel, sending the plastic tumbler skittering across the marble floor. The sound was nothing, barely audible over the music and conversation, but it was enough. Adrian's head turned at the movement, his eyes scanning the room with the same focus she remembered from when he was deep in thought about a complex problem. Their gazes met across the crowded ballroom. The world stopped. Emily watched as recognition dawned in Adrian's green eyes, the same eyes that looked back at her every day from Hazel's face. She saw the exact moment when his carefully constructed composure cracked, when 3 years of buried emotion flickered across his features like lightning. He took a step toward her, his movement pulling him away from his companion, who was still talking and hadn't noticed his sudden distraction. Emily's instinct was to run, but her legs felt frozen. Hazel chose that moment to stand up, her small hands gripping Emily's dress as she pulled herself upright, turning to see what had captured her mother's attention. Adrian's eyes moved from Emily to the little girl beside her, and Emily watched as every color drained from his face. Hazel had inherited his eyes, his strong jawline, the stubborn set of his chin. There was no mistaking the resemblance, not for anyone who knew Adrian Westfall well enough to see past his carefully maintained facade. The blonde woman finally noticed Adrian's distraction and followed his gaze, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rising slightly as she took in Emily and Hazel. For a moment that lasted an eternity. The four of them existed in a bubble separate from the rest of the party. The music continued. Guests laughed and danced. Champagne glasses clinked in celebration. But in that corner of the ballroom, 3 years of silence collapsed into a single, earth-shattering moment of recognition. Adrian's lips moved, forming Emily's name without sound. His eyes moved again to Hazel, who was now looking directly at him with the fearless curiosity of a toddler meeting a stranger. Emily watched as Adrian put the pieces together, the timeline, the resemblance, the reason she'd tried so desperately to contact him 3 years ago. When his eyes found Emily's again, they held a question that made her chest tighten with old pain and new fear. She nodded once, barely perceptible, but enough. Adrian's world, so carefully constructed, so perfectly controlled, crumbled and rebuilt itself in the space of a heartbeat. Adrian moved across the ballroom like a man in a trance, each step deliberate despite the chaos raging in his chest. Guests parted unconsciously before him, sensing the intensity radiating from his usually controlled demeanor. "Adrian?" Vivian's voice seemed to come from a great distance. "Where are you going?" The Hartwells wanted to, but Adrian was already gone, leaving her standing alone with confusion etched across her perfect features. Emily watched him approach, her heart hammering against her ribs. 3 years of imagined conversations, of practiced explanations, of dreaded confrontations. None of it had prepared her for this moment. Hazel sensed her mother's tension and pressed closer, her small hand fisting in Emily's dress. "Emily." Adrian's voice was rough, barely controlled. He stopped just close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same one he'd worn 3 years ago, the one that used to linger on her clothes after their embraces. Adrian. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. They stood there for a heartbeat, the weight of 3 years pressing between them. Hazel chose that moment to peek out from behind Emily's skirt, her green eyes, so achingly familiar, meeting Adrian's with innocent curiosity. "Hi," Hazel said simply, the way children do when meeting someone new. Adrian's composure cracked visibly. His hands clenched at his sides as he stared down at the little girl who bore his features so clearly it was impossible to deny. "She's—" Adrian's voice broke. He cleared his throat and tried again. "How old is she?" 2 years and 4 months. Emily's answer hung in the air between them like a confession. Adrian's jaw worked silently as he did the math, his businessman's mind calculating timelines with devastating accuracy. When he looked at Emily again, his eyes held a mixture of wonder, pain, and something that looked dangerously close to betrayal. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Privately, Emily glanced around the crowded ballroom, suddenly aware of the curious glances they were attracting. Senator Hartwell's wife was openly staring from across the room, and Emily could practically see the gossip forming in real time. "The library," Adrian said, reading her thoughts. "No one will disturb us there." Emily hesitated, instinctively protective of the safe space she'd built around herself and Hazel. But Adrian wasn't the enemy here. He was Hazel's father, whether he knew it or not, whether he wanted to be or not. "Okay," she whispered. Adrian led them through a side hallway away from the party noise. The Hartwell Mansion's library was a sanctuary of dark wood and leather, lined floor to ceiling with books that smelled of vanilla and old stories. A fire crackled in the massive fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the Persian rug. Emily set Hazel down near a basket of children's books that had been thoughtfully placed in the corner, probably for other young guests. Her daughter immediately gravitated toward them with the single-minded focus only toddlers possessed. "She likes books," Adrian observed, his voice strangely hollow. "She loves them. I read to her every night." Emily's throat felt tight. "She has your focus when something interests her." Adrian flinched as if she'd struck him. "Emily, I need you to explain to me how—" He gestured helplessly toward Hazel. "I need to understand what happened." Emily wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire's warmth. "What happened is that I left Portland to find myself. What happened is that 8 weeks later, I discovered I was pregnant. What happened is that I tried to call you, text you, email you, for weeks, Adrian, but you'd blocked me everywhere. You left," Adrian said, his voice gaining strength and an edge she remembered from their worst fights. "You walked away from us, from me. What was I supposed to think when you suddenly wanted back in?" "I didn't want back in." Emily's voice rose slightly before she caught herself, glancing at Hazel to make sure she was still absorbed in her books. "I wanted to tell you that you were going to be a father." The words hit Adrian like a physical blow. He sank into one of the leather armchairs, his head in his hands. "A father," he repeated, the words barely audible. "God, Emily, a father." "I was scared," Emily continued, the words pouring out after 3 years of being held back. "I was alone in a new city, pregnant, having panic attacks almost daily. I barely slept for months because every time I closed my eyes I worried about doing everything wrong." Adrian looked up at her, his face stricken. "You should have tried harder to reach me." "Tried harder?" Emily's carefully controlled composure finally cracked. "Adrian, I called your office pretending to be a client. I sent emails through your company's contact form. I even showed up at your building once, but security said you'd instructed them not to let me up. How exactly should I have tried harder?" Adrian's face went white. I didn't tell them." He stopped, running his hands through his hair. "My assistant. When you left, I wasn't functioning well. I told Marcus to handle all my personal calls, to filter out anything that wasn't business critical." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. He knew who I was. He was protecting me. At least he thought he was. Adrian's voice was hollow with realization. "Jesus, Emily. He never told me you'd tried to contact me." Emily felt a laugh bubble up, bitter and sharp. "So we were both victims of good intentions." "Don't." Adrian stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "Don't make this about misunderstandings and bad timing. You still chose to give up on us. You still decided I wasn't worth fighting for." "I chose myself," Emily said quietly. "For the first time in our entire relationship, I chose myself. And I'm not sorry for that part, Adrian. I needed to learn who I was outside of being your girlfriend. Adrian turned to face her, his eyes blazing. And what did you learn? That you were better off without me? Emily looked at Hazel, who had found a picture book about Christmas trees, and was narrating the story to herself in the serious way children do. I learned that I'm stronger than I ever imagined, Emily said finally. I learned that love shouldn't require me to disappear. I learned that I can build a life that fits me, not the other way around. And our daughter? Adrian's voice cracked on the words. What did you learn about her? Emily's heart squeezed at the way he said our daughter, like he was testing the words, seeing how they felt in his mouth. I learned that she's the best thing I've ever done, Emily whispered, that every sleepless night, every moment of terror, every anxiety attack was worth it because she exists. Adrian's eyes found Hazel again, drinking in details. The way she turned pages carefully, the little furrow between her brows when she concentrated, the way she hummed softly under her breath. What's her name? He asked. Hazel. Hazel Rose Carrington. Carrington, Adrian repeated. Not Westfall. The hurt in his voice made Emily's chest ache. You didn't know she existed, Adrian. I couldn't. I wouldn't put your name on her birth certificate when you'd made it clear you wanted nothing to do with me. But everything to do with her, Adrian said fiercely. If I'd known. If you'd known what? You would have taken my calls? You would have wanted to be involved? Emily's voice carried 3 years of uncertainty and pain. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, watching Hazel attempt to read words she couldn't yet understand. Yes, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. If I'd known about her, everything would have been different. At that moment, Hazel looked up from her book and noticed Adrian watching her. She tilted her head, studying him with the unself-conscious directness of a child. You look sad, she announced matter-of-factly. Adrian's breath caught. He knelt down slowly, bringing himself to her eye level. Maybe a little, he admitted. Hazel considered this seriously, then held out her book. Book makes me happy. You want book? Emily watched, her heart breaking and healing simultaneously, as Adrian's carefully constructed walls crumbled in the face of his daughter's innocent generosity. I would love to share your book, Adrian said softly. And in that moment, as Hazel scooted closer to show him the pictures, Emily realized that some fractures could never be fully healed, but sometimes, if you were very lucky, they could be rebuilt into something even stronger. The library door opened with a soft click, and Vivian Clark stepped inside, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with the precision of a metronome. Her perfectly composed expression wavered only slightly when she took in the intimate scene, Adrian kneeling on the floor beside a toddler, Emily watching them both with tears threatening to spill. There you are, Vivian said, her voice carrying that practiced lightness she used when she was deeply annoyed, but needed to appear gracious. The Hartwells are wondering where their guest of honor disappeared to. Adrian looked up from the picture book Hazel had been showing him, the movement reluctant, as if leaving this moment might make it disappear entirely. Vivian, he said, his voice still rough with emotion. This is Emily, and this is... He paused, the words catching in his throat. This is Hazel. Vivian's ice-blue eyes moved between Emily and the child, her expression sharpening as she processed what she was seeing. She was intelligent. Adrian had always appreciated that about her, and it didn't take long for her to piece together the implications. I see, Vivian said coolly. How unexpected. Emily stood slowly, instinctively moving closer to Hazel. The protective gesture wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Mama, Hazel said, tugging on Emily's dress. The pretty lady has sparkly ears. Despite everything, Emily found herself smiling at her daughter's innocent observation about Vivian's diamond earrings. Yes, she does, sweetheart. Vivian's expression softened slightly at the compliment, but her posture remained rigid. She's beautiful, she said, and there was genuine sincerity in her voice. She has your eyes, Adrian. The simple statement hung in the air like a challenge and an acknowledgement all at once. Adrian stood slowly, his gaze moving between the 3 women in his life, past, present, and the small person who represented an entirely different future than the one he'd planned. Viv, Adrian said carefully, I need some time to process this. Of course you do. Vivian's smile was sharp around the edges. 3 years is quite a lot to process in one evening. Emily winced at the subtle barb, but she couldn't entirely blame the other woman. If their positions were reversed, Emily wasn't sure she'd be handling the situation with even this much grace. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, Vivian continued, her eyes never leaving Adrian's face. At home. No. The word came out more forcefully than Adrian intended. I mean, yes, we need to talk, but not tonight. Tonight I want to spend time with. He gestured helplessly toward Hazel, who was now attempting to climb onto one of the leather chairs. With your daughter, Vivian finished, her voice carefully neutral. Of course. Emily watched the exchange with growing discomfort. She hadn't come here to destroy anyone's relationship or complicate Adrian's life. She'd simply wanted to attend a Christmas party and prove to herself that she could exist in the same world as her past. Adrian, Emily said quietly. Maybe we should. No. Adrian's voice was firm. Please. I just found out I have a daughter. I can't just go back to the party and pretend this didn't happen. Hazel, oblivious to the adult tensions swirling around her, had successfully climbed into the chair and was now bouncing slightly, testing its spring. Bouncy chair? She announced with delight. Despite everything, Adrian smiled. A real smile, not the practiced one Emily had seen him wear at the party. It is bouncy, isn't it? You want bounce too? Hazel asked, scooting to one side of the large chair and patting the space beside her. Emily's heart clenched as she watched Adrian's face transform. For just a moment, all the sophisticated billionaire composure fell away, replaced by something raw and wondering. I would love to, Adrian said softly. Vivian cleared her throat delicately. Adrian, darling, perhaps this conversation would be better suited for a more appropriate time and place. She was right, Emily realized. This was neither the time nor the place for family revelations. They were at a Christmas gala surrounded by Portland's social elite, and Adrian's girlfriend was standing 3 feet away watching her carefully constructed world shift on its axis. She's right, Emily said, lifting Hazel from the chair despite her daughter's protests. We should go. No. Adrian stood quickly. Please, where are you staying? Can I see her again? Tomorrow. Emily hesitated. 3 years of building walls around her heart warred with the desperate hope in Adrian's voice, and the way Hazel had already begun to warm to this stranger who shared her eyes. We're staying with my parents, Emily said finally. On Maple Street. The blue house with the white shutters? Adrian asked. Your childhood home? Emily nodded, surprised he remembered such a detail from stories she'd told him years ago. I'll call you, Adrian said. In the morning. If you'd be okay with that. Adrian. Vivian's voice carried a warning note. I'll be okay with that, Emily said quietly, ignoring Vivian's sharp intake of breath. Hazel, sensing that their time in the interesting room was ending, waved at Adrian with the enthusiasm she reserved for her favorite people. Bye-bye, bookman, she said seriously. Adrian's laugh was shaky. Goodbye, Hazel. Sweet dreams. Emily gathered their things quickly, her hands trembling slightly as she packed Hazel's toys. The weight of Vivian's stare was almost tangible, but she forced herself to focus on the simple task of getting ready to leave. Emily! Adrian's voice stopped her at the door. She turned, meeting his eyes one last time. Thank you, he said simply, for letting me meet her. Emily nodded, not trusting her voice, and slipped out of the library with Hazel in her arms. Behind them she could hear Vivian's voice cool and controlled. Well, that was illuminating. As Emily made her way back through the mansion, she found Camilla frantically searching for her near the coat check. There you are. I've been looking everywhere. Are you ready to go? You look like you've seen a ghost. Something like that, Emily murmured, letting Camilla help her with their coats. The ride to her parents' house was a blur of Camilla's concerned questions and Emily's monosyllabic answers. Hazel fell asleep in her car seat, exhausted by the evening's excitement, leaving Emily alone with thoughts that felt too big for her head. By the time they pulled into the familiar driveway, Emily had made a decision. Tomorrow, when Adrian called, she would set boundaries. Clear, protective boundaries that put Hazel's well-being first and kept Emily's own heart safely out of the equation. But as she carried her sleeping daughter up the front steps of her childhood home, Emily couldn't shake the memory of Adrian's face when Hazel had offered to share her book. The wonder, the instant love, the recognition of something he'd never known he was missing. Some doors once opened could never be fully closed again. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was good to see you tonight. Thank you for sharing her with me, even for just a moment. Emily stared at the message for a long time before finally typing back, she deserves to know her father. The response came almost immediately, and I deserve the chance to be the father she needs. If you'll let me. Emily turned off her phone without responding, but sleep was a long time coming that night. Emily woke to the sound of her daughter's laughter drifting through the thin walls of her childhood bedroom. Sunlight streamed through the familiar yellow curtains her mother had never bothered to replace, casting everything in the warm glow of memory and possibility. For a moment, she lay still, listening to Hazel's animated chatter downstairs and her father's deep rumble of response. Then the events of the previous evening crashed back over her like a wave. Adrian's face when he saw Hazel, the conversation in the library, the text messages that had kept her awake until nearly 3 in the morning. Her phone sat silent on the nightstand, but Emily could feel its presence like a held breath. She found Hazel in the kitchen, perched on a stack of phone books in her grandfather's chair, enthusiastically destroying a stack of pancakes while regaling him with her version of the previous night's events. And there was sparkly lights everywhere, Grandpa, like stars but inside. Emily's father, James Carrington, looked up as Emily entered, his kind eyes crinkling with amusement. Your daughter has been telling me about quite the adventure. Has she now? Emily kissed Hazel's syrup-sticky cheek before pouring herself coffee from the pot that had been brewing since dawn, her father's unbreakable routine for 40 years. She mentioned a man who liked books. Her mother Susan said from the stove where she was flipping what appeared to be enough pancakes to feed a small army. Anyone interesting? Emily's parents had always been careful not to push about Hazel's father. They'd been supportive when Emily returned pregnant and alone, asking no questions that she wasn't ready to answer. But Emily could see the curiosity they'd politely contained for 3 years, flickering in both their faces. Actually, Emily said, sitting down beside Hazel, there's something I need to tell you both. Before she could continue, the doorbell rang. Through the kitchen window, Emily could see a figure on the front porch, tall, dark-haired, wearing jeans and a cable-knit sweater that made him look younger and less formidable than the tuxedo-clad billionaire from last night. That's him, Emily said quietly. That's Hazel's father. The silence that followed was profound. Emily's parents exchanged a look that contained 3 years' worth of unasked questions and careful assumptions. I'll get it, James said finally, his voice carefully neutral. Dad, wait. Emily stood quickly. There's more. His name is Adrian Westfall. He didn't know about Hazel until last night. Susan's wooden spoon stopped stirring the pancake batter. Didn't know? It's complicated, Emily said, already moving toward the front door. But he wants to meet her properly, to be part of her life. The doorbell rang again, and Hazel looked up from her pancakes with interest. Is that Bookman? She asked hopefully. Emily's heart squeezed. Yes, sweetheart. Would you like to see him again? Hazel nodded enthusiastically, syrup creating abstract art across her cheeks. Emily opened the front door to find Adrian shifting nervously from foot to foot, holding a large gift bag and what appeared to be coffee for 2. Hi, he said, and Emily was struck by how different he looked. Younger, more uncertain, more like the man she'd fallen in love with 3 years ago than the polished businessman from the gala. Hi, she replied, stepping back to let him in. You brought coffee. I remembered you liked the hazelnut blend from Morrison's, Adrian said, then stopped, color rising in his cheeks. I mean, you used to. People change. I still like hazelnut, Emily said softly. They stood in the familiar entryway of Emily's childhood home, surrounded by family photos and her mother's collection of vintage Christmas ornaments, while 3 years of silence stretched between them. Bookman, Hazel's voice carried from the kitchen, followed by the sound of little feet running across hardwood floors. She appeared in the hallway like a small tornado, her face lighting up when she saw Adrian. Without hesitation, she launched herself at his legs in an enthusiastic hug. Adrian went very still, looking down at the small person clinging to his knees with an expression of wonder that made Emily's chest tight. Hello, Hazel, he said carefully, as if afraid his voice might startle her away. I brought you something. Hazel immediately released his legs and looked expectantly at the gift bag bouncing slightly on her toes. Can I? Adrian looked to Emily for permission. Emily nodded, watching as he knelt down to Hazel's level and presented the bag with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for much more important occasions. Inside was a picture book, The Night Before Christmas, and a small stuffed reindeer with impossibly soft fur and a red velvet bow. Reindeer! Hazel squealed, immediately hugging the toy to her chest. Like Santa has. Exactly like Santa has, Adrian agreed, his voice rough around the edges. His name is... Well, what would you like to call him? Hazel studied the toy seriously, her small face scrunched in concentration. Rudolph, she announced finally, because he's got a red bow like Rudolph's nose. Perfect, Adrian said, and Emily could see him memorizing every detail of this moment. The way Hazel's eyes sparkled, how she held the reindeer, the serious way she considered important decisions like naming toys. Mama, Hazel said, tugging on Emily's sweater, can Bookman read the Christmas story? Before Emily could answer, her parents appeared in the hallway, her father's protective posture unmistakable, her mother's curiosity barely contained behind polite concern. Adrian stood slowly, shifting into the more formal demeanor Emily recognized from business settings. Mr. and Mrs. Carrington, he said, extending his hand. I'm Adrian Westfall. Thank you for letting me into your home. James shook Adrian's hand with the firm grip of a man who'd spent his life working with his hands, his eyes taking in everything. The expensive watch, the designer jeans, the way Adrian looked at both Emily and Hazel like they might disappear if he blinked. We've heard nothing but wonderful things about you, Susan said with pointed sweetness, making Emily want to disappear into the floorboards. Mom, Emily warned. What? It's true. Emily told us so much about Hazel's father over the years. Susan's smile could have powered the Christmas lights downtown. All those lovely stories about how much he wanted to be involved. The barb hit its mark. Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and Emily saw the moment he realized exactly how her parents viewed him, as the man who'd abandoned their daughter and granddaughter. I understand your feelings toward me, Adrian said quietly. I deserve them, but I'd like the chance to earn something better, if you'll let me. We'll see, James said simply. An awkward silence settled over the group until Hazel, oblivious to the adult tensions, grabbed Adrian's hand with her free one, and Emily's with the other. Story time, she announced with the authority of someone accustomed to having her requests honored immediately. The living room, Emily said, grateful for her daughter's ability to cut through complications with toddler logic. They settled on the overstuffed couch that had anchored Emily's childhood, Adrian on one end, Emily on the other, with Hazel nestled between them clutching her new reindeer. Emily's parents hovered in the doorway, making no pretense of leaving them alone. Adrian opened the picture book with hands that weren't quite steady and began to read in a voice that grew more confident with each line. Hazel followed along intently, occasionally interrupting to point out details in the illustrations or to make sure Rudolph could see the pictures too. And to all a good night, Adrian finished, closing the book softly. Again, Hazel demanded immediately. Adrian looked to Emily, who nodded. They read the story 3 more times, with Hazel adding more commentary each round, until she grew drowsy and curled against Emily's side, still clutching both the book and her reindeer. In the quiet that followed, Emily became acutely aware of Adrian's presence beside her, the familiar warmth of him, the way he was studying Hazel's sleeping face like he was trying to memorize every detail. She's perfect, he whispered finally. She is, Emily agreed, even when she's being impossible, which is most days. Adrian's smile was soft and real. I'd like to see those days too, if you'll let me. Emily looked down at their daughter, peaceful in sleep, trusting in the way only children could be. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain and complicated, full of questions that didn't have easy answers. But for this moment, in this room where Emily had learned to read and dream and hope, it felt like maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to build something new from the beautiful wreckage of what they'd once been. 3 days later, Emily found herself in the strange position of watching Adrian Westfall, billionaire CEO, master of boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations, get thoroughly defeated by a 2-year-old's refusal to wear shoes. But Hazel, Adrian said with the patience of someone clearly out of his depth, we can't go to the park without shoes. No shoes, Hazel declared from her position on the living room floor, where she'd planted herself with the immovable determination only toddlers possessed. Feet want to be free. Emily bit back a smile from her spot in the kitchen doorway. Adrian had been coming by every day since their reunion, spending hours learning the rhythms of his daughter's world. Story time, snack preferences, the elaborate rituals required for everything from brushing teeth to choosing which stuffed animal would accompany them on outings. She's testing you, Emily said, coming to his rescue. Hazel, remember what we talked about? Cold feet get sick feet. Mama's feet get sick. Hazel's eyes went wide with concern. They might, if they get too cold, Emily said gently. And then Mama couldn't chase you at the playground. This logic apparently made sense to Hazel. who immediately scrambled for her tiny sneakers with the enthusiasm she'd shown for rejecting them moments before. Adrian stood slowly, running a hand through hair that was already mussed from the morning's adventures. "How do you make it look so easy?" 3 years of practice, Emily said, and the strategic deployment of guilt. "You'll learn." The casual assumption that he'd be around long enough to learn hung in the air between them. They'd been carefully avoiding discussions about the future, focusing instead on the immediate present of Adrian getting to know his daughter. But Emily could see the questions building in his eyes, about custody, about living arrangements, about where they went from here. "Shoes on," Hazel announced proudly, though she'd managed to get them on the wrong feet. "Close enough," Adrian said, earning a giggle from Hazel and an approving nod from Emily. The park was only a few blocks away, but the walk took nearly 20 minutes thanks to Hazel's need to investigate every interesting stick, leaf, and crack in the sidewalk. Adrian followed her meandering pace with surprising patience, asking earnest questions about her discoveries and listening to her elaborate explanations, with the same attention he'd once given quarterly earnings reports. "She's really taken to him," Susan Carrington observed, falling into step beside Emily. Her mother had insisted on joining their park expedition, claiming a need for fresh air that didn't fool anyone. "She has," Emily agreed, watching Adrian crouch down to examine a particularly fascinating rock Hazel had found. "Sometimes I think she knows, somehow, that he's her father." "Children are intuitive about these things," Susan said. "But what about you, sweetheart? How are you taking to him?" Emily's step faltered slightly. It was the question she'd been avoiding, even in her own thoughts. Watching Adrian with Hazel was doing dangerous things to the walls she'd built around her heart. He was patient where she'd remembered him being driven, gentle where she'd recalled intensity. Being a father was bringing out sides of him she'd never seen before. "It's complicated, Mom. The best things usually are." At the playground, Hazel made a beeline for the swings, calling for Adrian to push her. "Higher, higher." Emily settled on a nearby bench, grateful for a moment to observe rather than participate. Adrian was a quick study. Within minutes, he'd learned the optimal pushing rhythm and the elaborate safety checks Hazel required before each swing session. His business phone rang twice, and both times he declined the calls without even looking to see who was calling. The old Adrian would have taken those calls, Emily realized, would have stepped away for just a quick minute that turned into 20. This Adrian kept his attention fully on Hazel, as if the rest of the world could wait. "He's changed," her mother said quietly, reading her thoughts. "Or maybe he's just on his best behavior," Emily replied, though she didn't quite believe it herself. "Emily." Susan's voice carried the tone she'd used when Emily was young and trying to convince herself of something that wasn't true. "When was the last time you saw him smile like that?" Emily looked over to find Adrian laughing at something Hazel had said, his face transformed by genuine joy. The smile reached his eyes in a way that made her chest tight with memory and possibility. "Never," Emily admitted quietly. "I never saw him smile like that." A new voice interrupted her thoughts. "Well, this is certainly domestic." Emily turned to find Vivian Clark approaching across the grass, her designer heels completely inappropriate for the park setting. She looked like a magazine ad that had wandered into real life, polished, perfect, and slightly out of place among the playground chaos. "Vivian," Emily said, standing slowly, "I didn't expect to see you here." "I can imagine." Vivian's smile was sharp, but not entirely unkind. "Adrian mentioned he'd be spending the afternoon getting to know his daughter. I thought I'd come see how that was going." On the swings, Adrian had spotted Vivian and was walking over with Hazel on his hip. His expression was carefully neutral, but Emily could see the tension in his shoulders. "Viv," he said, "what are you doing here?" "Checking on my boyfriend," Vivian replied smoothly, making sure he hasn't been completely consumed by this new development. Hazel studied Vivian with the frank curiosity of a child. "You're sparkly lady," she announced. "Yes, I am," Vivian agreed, and her smile softened slightly. "Hello again, Hazel. Want to swing?" Hazel offered generously. "Adrian pushes good." Emily watched Vivian's perfectly composed expression flicker with something, surprise perhaps, or the first crack in her carefully maintained indifference. "That's very kind of you," Vivian said, "but these shoes weren't made for playground equipment." "Silly shoes," Hazel pronounced with the authority of someone who'd recently fought her own footwear battles. Adrian's mouth twitched slightly, but he managed to keep his expression serious. "Hazel has strong opinions about appropriate footwear." "So I see." Vivian's gaze moved between Adrian and Emily, and Emily could practically see her calculating the dynamics at play. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment, Adrian?" "Of course," Adrian said, though he looked reluctant to leave Hazel's side. Would you mind?" "Of course not," Emily said, taking Hazel from Adrian's arms. "We'll be right here." She watched them walk a short distance away, their conversation immediately intense despite their low voices. Vivian gestured occasionally, her body language conveying frustration and determination in equal measure. Adrian listened with his hands in his pockets, his posture defensive. "What they talking about?" Hazel asked, following Emily's gaze. "Grown-up stuff," Emily said, settling back onto the bench with Hazel on her lap. "Boring," Hazel declared, then brightened. "More swings?" Emily was about to respond when she caught a fragment of Vivian's voice carrying across the playground. "Can't just throw away 3 months for a child you didn't even know existed." The words hit Emily like a physical blow. 3 months. Adrian and Vivian had been together for 3 months. Not the casual dating arrangement Emily had imagined, but a real relationship with expectations and plans and complications she hadn't fully considered. She looked away quickly, focusing on Hazel's chatter about the other children on the playground, but she could still see Adrian and Vivian in her peripheral vision, their conversation growing more animated by the moment. When they returned, Vivian's composure had slipped slightly, and Adrian looked like a man caught between two worlds with no clear path forward. "I should go," Vivian said, her voice carefully controlled. "I have a dinner appointment." She leaned up to kiss Adrian's cheek, a gesture that felt like marking territory, before turning to Emily. "It was nice seeing you again, Emily," she said, and there was something almost like sympathy in her eyes. "I hope you find what you're looking for." After she left, Adrian was quiet, pushing Hazel on the swings with mechanical precision while his thoughts were clearly elsewhere. "Is everything okay?" Emily asked finally. Adrian's hands stilled on the swing chains. "She wants to know where this is going. Between us. Between me and Hazel." "And what did you tell her?" "The truth," Adrian said quietly. "That I don't know. That everything changed 3 nights ago, and I'm still figuring out what that means." Hazel, oblivious to the adult complexities swirling around her, kicked her legs and demanded to go higher, higher, but Emily barely heard her, because suddenly she realized that she wasn't the only one whose carefully constructed life had been upended by their Christmas reunion. Adrian had built a world too, one that included Vivian and expectations and a future that looked nothing like the one unfolding on this playground. And for the first time since that night at the gala, Emily wondered if she'd done the right thing by letting him back into their lives at all. Emily hadn't intended to drive by Adrian's penthouse building. She'd simply been taking the long way home from Hazel's doctor appointment, letting her daughter nap in the car seat while she processed the weight of decisions that felt too big for one person to make. But there she was, sitting in her rental car across from the glass tower that had once felt like a prison, watching Vivian Clark emerge from the lobby with red-rimmed eyes and a suitcase. Emily's heart clenched as she watched the other woman pause on the sidewalk, gathering herself with the kind of dignity that came from a lifetime of maintaining appearances. Even in heartbreak, Vivian was perfectly put together, her coat buttoned just so, her hair falling in precise waves despite the December wind. The scene told a story Emily didn't need words to understand. Her phone buzzed with a text from Adrian. "Can we talk?" Something happened with Vivian. Emily stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "I know. I saw her leaving. You're here?" Emily looked up to see Adrian standing at his living room window 30 floors up, his figure small but unmistakable against the glass. Even from this distance, she could see the tension in his posture. "Meet me at Morrison's?" she typed. 20 minutes. The coffee shop held too many memories. Emily tried to ignore them as she claimed a corner table, keeping Hazel occupied with a coloring book while they waited. Her daughter was in one of her chatty moods, providing a running commentary on her artistic choices that helped Emily avoid thinking about why her chest felt tight with anxiety. Adrian arrived looking like he'd dressed in a hurry, his shirt slightly wrinkled, his hair more disheveled than she'd seen it since their college days. He moved through the familiar space like a ghost, visiting scenes from his past life. "Hazel's here," he observed, his voice carefully neutral. "She fell asleep in the car. I didn't want to wake her." Emily kept her tone light, but she could see Adrian processing the implications. That she hadn't planned for this to be a private conversation, that she was maintaining boundaries even now. "Hi, Adrian." Hazel looked up from her coloring with genuine delight. "Want to see my picture?" "I'd love to," Adrian said, settling into the chair across from Emily with a wariness that broke her heart. Hazel showed him her masterpiece, a Christmas tree that was more enthusiasm than accuracy, decorated with purple ornaments and what appeared to be a dinosaur on top instead of a star. "It's beautiful," Adrian said seriously. "Tell me about the dinosaur." "That's Rex," Hazel explained matter-of-factly. "He helps Santa. Santa needs help because his bag is really heavy." "That makes perfect sense," Adrian agreed, earning a beaming smile from Hazel before she returned to her coloring. The casual normalcy of the exchange felt surreal given what Emily had witnessed outside Adrian's building. She waited until Hazel was absorbed in her art before speaking. "How is she?" Emily asked quietly. Adrian's laugh was hollow. "Vivienne, she's handling it better than I expected, honestly. Better than I deserve." "What happened?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, staring at his untouched coffee. "She asked me to choose, her or—" He gestured helplessly toward Hazel. "That's not fair to any of you, isn't it?" Adrian's eyes met Emily's with an intensity that made her want to look away. "She's been patient for 3 days while I disappeared into this new reality. She has every right to know where she stands." Emily felt heat rise in her cheeks. "So you chose." "I chose my daughter." Adrian's voice was firm, but Emily could see the cost of that choice written in the lines around his eyes. "But Em, I need you to understand, this isn't just about me getting to know Hazel anymore. Vivian made me realize something." Emily's stomach twisted with anticipation. "What? I can't do this halfway. I can't be a weekend father or a Christmas and birthdays dad. If I'm going to be Hazel's father, I want to be her father. Really be her father." The words should have filled Emily with relief. Instead, they triggered every protective instinct she'd developed over 3 years of single parenthood. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means I want to move back to Portland permanently. It means I want joint custody. It means I want to be involved in every decision about her life. Schools, doctors, everything." Adrian leaned forward, his intensity growing with each word. "It means I want to make up for 3 years of lost time." Emily felt the walls she'd built around her heart slam shut. "Just like that? You want to waltz back into our lives and restructure everything because you suddenly decided you want to play father? Play father?" Adrian's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from other customers. He forced himself to lower it, but his eyes blazed. "Emily, she's my daughter. I have rights." "Rights?" Emily's whisper was sharp enough to cut glass. "You have rights?" "I was alone for 9 months, Adrian. Alone through morning sickness and anxiety attacks and labor. Alone through sleepless nights and teething and every first word, every first step. You want to talk about rights?" Hazel looked up from her coloring, sensing the shift in atmosphere even if she couldn't understand the words. "Mama sad?" she asked with the concerned voice she used when Emily had bad days. "No, sweetheart," Emily said, forcing her voice to gentle. "Mama's just talking with Adrian about grown-up things." "Boring," Hazel pronounced, returning to her dinosaur Christmas tree. Adrian ran his hands through his hair, struggling to find words that wouldn't make everything worse. "You're right," he said finally. "You did all of that alone, and I'll never be able to make up for that. But I can't change the past, Em. I can only try to be the father she needs going forward." "And what about what I need?" The question came out more vulnerable than Emily intended. "What about the life I built for us?" "I'm not trying to take her away from you," Adrian said desperately. "I want us to figure this out together." "Together?" Emily's laugh was bitter. "The way we figured things out before, when I slowly disappeared into your world until I forgot who I was? This is different. I'm different." "Are you?" Emily challenged. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're doing exactly what you always did, making unilateral decisions about what's best for everyone without actually consulting anyone." Adrian's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? You broke up with Vivian without discussing it with me first. You decided you wanted joint custody without asking if I was ready for that. You made all these plans about moving to Portland as if my opinion was just a formality." The truth of her words hung between them like a chasm. Emily could see Adrian processing them, recognizing the patterns she was pointing out. "So, what do you want me to do?" Adrian asked finally. "Pretend I never found out about her? Go back to my life in Seattle and send birthday cards?" "I want you to slow down," Emily said. "I want you to understand that this isn't just about what you want or what you think is best. This is about Hazel, and she needs stability, not upheaval." "I am thinking about Hazel." "No," Emily interrupted. "You're thinking about yourself, about your guilt, and your missed opportunities, and your need to fix 3 years of absence in 3 weeks. The accusation hit its mark. Adrian went very still, his face cycling through hurt, anger, and something that looked like recognition. Maybe you're right, he said quietly. Maybe I am being selfish. But I look at her and I see everything I missed, everything I'll never get back. Can you understand that? Emily's heart cracked a little at the pain in his voice, but she forced herself to stay strong. I can understand it, she said, but I won't let your regret destabilize the life I've built for us. Hazel comes first, Adrian. Always. She comes first for me too. Then prove it. Stop trying to solve this like a business problem and start thinking like a father. Hazel chose that moment to hold up her finished masterpiece, completely oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults. All done, she announced proudly. Both Emily and Adrian turned to admire her work. And for a moment, Emily caught a glimpse of what they could be. Two parents putting their child first despite their own complicated history. But then reality crashed back, and Emily realized that wanting something and being able to achieve it were very different things. I should take her home, Emily said, beginning to pack up Hazel's supplies. She needs her nap. Emily, please, Adrian said urgently. Don't let this conversation end like this. We need to figure this out. We will, Emily said, lifting Hazel into her arms. But not today. Not when we're both too emotional to think clearly. As she walked toward the door, Emily heard Adrian call her name one more time. She turned back to find him standing beside their table, looking lost in a way that reminded her of the man she'd fallen in love with years ago. Vulnerable, uncertain, achingly human. I love her, he said simply. I know I don't have the right to that yet, but I love her. And I love... He stopped himself, but Emily heard the unfinished words anyway. Outside, in the December cold, Emily buckled Hazel into her car seat and tried to ignore the way her hands were shaking. In the space of one conversation, everything had become impossibly complicated again. But as she drove toward her parents' house, one thought kept circling in her mind. Adrian had broken up with Vivian for Hazel, for them. And despite everything, that meant something she wasn't ready to examine too closely. Christmas Eve arrived with the kind of snow that transformed Portland into a postcard, each flake catching the light like scattered diamonds. Emily stood at her childhood bedroom window, watching Hazel build a snowman in the backyard with her grandfather, their laughter carrying through the crisp air like music. It had been 4 days since the confrontation at Morrison's, 4 days of silence from Adrian that felt both like relief and loss. Emily had convinced herself she was grateful for the space, but her phone felt heavy in her pocket, weighted with messages she'd typed and deleted a dozen times. He's here, her mother called from downstairs, her voice carrying a mix of warning and curiosity. Emily's heart lurched. Through the window she could see Adrian's car pulling into the driveway, but something was different. Instead of his usual sleek sedan, he was driving a dark green SUV with a car seat visible in the back. He'd bought a car seat. The simple gesture hit Emily with unexpected force. This wasn't the impulsive gesture of a man trying to prove a point. It was the practical decision of someone planning to be a permanent part of Hazel's life. Emily made her way downstairs to find Adrian standing in the foyer, shaking snow from his coat while her parents hovered nearby with the protective energy of bodyguards. Hi, he said simply, his eyes finding hers immediately. Hi, she replied, noting the way he looked. Tired, uncertain, but somehow more grounded than she'd seen him in years. Daddy! Hazel's voice exploded from the kitchen, followed by the thunder of small feet running across hardwood. The words stopped everyone cold. Emily watched Adrian's face transform as Hazel launched herself at his legs, calling him Daddy as naturally as if she'd been doing it her whole life. Hey, sweetheart, Adrian said, his voice rough with emotion as he lifted Hazel into his arms. I missed you. Missed you too, Hazel said seriously. Grandpa and me made a snowman. Want to see? I would love to see your snowman, Adrian said, but his eyes were on Emily. If that's okay with Mama. Emily nodded, not trusting her voice, and followed them toward the kitchen where the back door led to the yard. Adrian, her father said quietly as they passed. A word? Emily saw Adrian's jaw tighten slightly, but he nodded. Of course. While Hazel gave Adrian an enthusiastic tour of her snow creation through the window, James Carrington pulled him aside with the gravity of a man about to deliver a verdict. I've been thinking about what my daughter told me, James said without preamble. About your conversation the other day. Adrian straightened, clearly preparing for a lecture. Sir, Let me finish. James held up a hand. Emily's been hurt before. Not by you, though God knows you did your share of damage. But before you, by people who made promises they didn't keep. People who said they wanted to be in her life and then disappeared when things got complicated. Adrian was very still, listening with the focus he'd once reserved for crucial business negotiations. My granddaughter has never had anyone disappoint her like that because Emily's been careful about who she lets into their world. James continued. So if you're going to be part of their lives, you better be sure. Because if you hurt that little girl, if you make promises you can't keep, there isn't a place on this earth you can hide from me. I understand, Adrian said quietly. Do you? James studied him with eyes that had seen decades of people making promises they couldn't keep. Because wanting to be a father and being able to be a father are two different things. Adrian looked through the window at Hazel, who was now lying on her back in the snow making angels while Emily watched from the porch steps. I've spent the last 4 days thinking about what Emily said, Adrian said finally. About how I approach problems. About how I tried to solve everything at once instead of just being present. And she was right. I was thinking like a businessman, not a father. I was trying to restructure a situation instead of building a relationship. James nodded slowly. That's a start. I bought a car seat, Adrian said suddenly, then immediately looked embarrassed by the admission. I know that sounds stupid, but I spent 2 hours at the store reading reviews and talking to salespeople about safety ratings, and I realized I didn't even know if Hazel was still in a forward-facing seat or if she'd graduated to a booster. I didn't know her weight or her favorite color or whether she gets carsick on long drives. And that bothered you. It terrified me, Adrian admitted, because I realized that loving her isn't enough. I have to learn her, all of her, every day, probably for the rest of my life. Through the window they could see Hazel had convinced Emily to join her snow angel project, both of them now lying side by side creating impressions in the fresh powder. What are you asking for, son? James asked gently. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Permission to take it slow, to earn my place in their lives instead of demanding it, to prove that I can be the father Hazel deserves, and the partner Emily needed me to be 3 years ago. Partner? I'm still in love with her, Adrian said simply. I probably never stopped, but I can't expect her to trust that, not after everything. I just want the chance to show her who I've become. James studied Adrian's face, looking for signs of the arrogance and entitlement his daughter had described. Instead, he saw something he recognized from his own early days as a father, the humbling realization that love meant putting someone else's needs before your own. Emily's the one you need to convince, not me, James said finally. But for what it's worth, I think you might actually mean it this time. Before Adrian could respond, the back door burst open, and Hazel tumbled inside, covered in snow and radiating joy. Daddy, come make angels, she demanded, tugging on his hand with wet mittens. Mama showed me how. Emily appeared in the doorway behind Hazel, cheeks pink from the cold, and something else. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of forgiveness. The snow's perfect for it, she said to Adrian, her voice carefully neutral but her eyes soft. If you want to. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had given him the greatest gift of his life, and then protected it so fiercely when he wasn't worthy of it. I want to, he said quietly, if you'll show me how. Outside, they lay in the snow while Hazel directed their angel making with the authority of a master artist. Emily found herself laughing at Adrian's serious concentration, the way he followed Hazel's instructions with the dedication he'd once brought to board meetings. Yours is lopsided, Emily observed as they stood to admire their work. Yours is perfect, Adrian replied. But he was looking at her, not the snow angel. The moment stretched between them, filled with 3 years of hurt and hope, and the possibility of something new. Hazel broke it by announcing she was cold and wanted hot chocolate. But as they walked back toward the house, Adrian caught Emily's hand. He said quietly, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything more than what you've already given me, but I want you to know I'm not going anywhere, not this time. Emily looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face, seeing something there she'd been afraid to believe. I know, she said finally. And Adrian, I'm not going anywhere either. Inside, as they warmed up with hot chocolate and Christmas cookies, Emily watched Adrian help Hazel hang her stocking by the fireplace. He listened to her elaborate explanation of Santa's logistics with the patience of a man who finally understood what mattered most. Later, after Hazel had been tucked into bed with promises that Santa would find her at Grandma and Grandpa's house, Emily found Adrian standing by the Christmas tree, studying the collection of ornaments that told the story of her family's history. "She put this one on herself," Emily said, pointing to a slightly askew angel near the bottom of the tree. She said it reminded her of her book friend. Adrian smiled, remembering their first meeting in the library. "She's incredible, Em. You've done an amazing job with her." "We've done an amazing job," Emily corrected gently. "Even when you weren't here, she's half you. Your stubbornness, your focus, your way of making everyone around you feel like they're the most important person in the world when you really pay attention." Adrian turned to face her fully. "I want to be the father she deserves, and I want to be the man you deserved 3 years ago. I know I can't undo the past, but—" Emily silenced him by placing her finger gently against his lips. "Adrian," she said softly, "we're different people now. I'm not the woman who lost herself in someone else's life, and you're not the man who was too driven to see what he had. Maybe we can't fix what we were, but maybe we can build something better." "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I'd like to find out. Slowly, carefully, with Hazel as our priority and our guide." Adrian's smile was soft and real and full of the kind of hope Emily had forgotten existed. "I'd like that too," he said, "more than I can say." Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the world in the kind of clean slate that only Christmas Eve could provide. And inside, 3 people who had found their way back to each other despite impossible odds prepared to discover what love looked like when it was built on truth instead of need, on choice instead of desperation. Some stories ended with grand gestures and dramatic declarations, but this one ended the way the best love stories did, quietly, honestly, with the promise of all the ordinary, extraordinary days to come. 1 year later, the morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows of Emily's new house. Their house, she corrected herself, still getting used to the pronoun, casting golden light across the breakfast table where chaos reigned supreme. Hazel, now 3.5, was engaged in what appeared to be complex negotiations with her pancakes, while Adrian attempted to braid her hair with the concentrated focus he'd once reserved for quarterly board meetings. "Daddy, you're pulling," Hazel announced with the patient tone of someone accustomed to training adults in proper hair braiding technique. "Sorry, sweetheart," Adrian murmured, his large hand surprisingly gentle as he loosened his grip. "Better? Much better. Mama, Daddy's getting good at braids." Emily looked up from packing Hazel's preschool lunch, unable to suppress her smile at the domestic scene that had become beautifully routine over the past year. Adrian in flannel pajama pants and an old t-shirt, completely absorbed in the intricate task of making his daughter's hair presentable for school. "He's had good teachers," Emily said, earning a grin from Adrian that still made her heart skip. The past year had been a careful dance of building something new from the foundation of what they'd once been. Adrian had kept his promise, moving to Portland, finding office space for the Northwest division of his company, and, most importantly, learning the rhythms of being a father one day at a time. There had been challenges, moments when old patterns threatened to resurface, when Emily's protective instincts clashed with Adrian's desire to be involved in every decision, nights when they'd talked until dawn, working through the delicate process of becoming a family, while respecting the independence Emily had fought so hard to maintain. But there had also been magic, watching Adrian discover the joy of bedtime stories and playground adventures, seeing Hazel bloom under the attention of a father who thought she hung the moon, finding herself falling in love not with the man Adrian had been, but with the man he was becoming, more patient, more present, more aware of the quiet moments that made life beautiful. "All done," Adrian announced, stepping back to admire his handiwork. Hazel hopped down from her chair and ran to the hallway mirror to inspect her appearance. The braid was slightly crooked, but she beamed at her reflection with the satisfaction of someone who felt properly loved and cared for. "Perfect," she declared, then bounded back to the kitchen. "Mama, can we tell him now?" Emily's heart fluttered with nervous excitement. "Tell me what?" Adrian asked, looking between them with curious suspicion. Emily had been waiting for the right moment for 3 weeks now, ever since the doctor's appointment that had changed everything. She'd wanted to be sure, wanted to process her own feelings before sharing news that would reshape their carefully constructed new normal. "Sit down," Emily said, her voice softer than usual. Adrian's expression shifted to concern. "Em, what's wrong? Is everything okay?" "Everything's wonderful," Emily said quickly. "I hope," I think it is. I'm hoping you'll think it is too. Hazel bounced on her toes, clearly bursting with the secret she'd been keeping since Emily had explained the news in age-appropriate terms. Just tell me, Adrian said, though his eyes were already beginning to shine with possibility. Emily reached into the kitchen drawer and pulled out a small wrapped box, her hands trembling slightly as she placed it on the table between them. Adrian stared at the box as if it might explode. Emily, open it, Hazel urged, climbing onto his lap with the impatience of someone who'd been waiting forever for this moment. Inside the box, nestled in tissue paper, was a tiny pair of baby booties, soft yellow knit with little ducks embroidered on the toes. Attached was a note in Emily's careful handwriting. Coming August 2026, Hazel is very excited to be a big sister. The silence that followed was profound. Adrian stared at the booties as if he were seeing a miracle, his hands shaking as he lifted them from the box. He began, his voice breaking slightly. 12 weeks, Emily confirmed. I wanted to wait until after the first trimester to tell you, to make sure everything was okay. Adrian's eyes found hers, swimming with tears he didn't bother to hide. Are you happy about it? We didn't plan. We talked about maybe someday, but I'm terrified, Emily admitted honestly, and thrilled, and completely overwhelmed. But Adrian, when I saw these little fluttering lines on the ultrasound screen, all I could think about was how much I wanted to share that moment with you. Baby brother or sister, Hazel announced proudly as if she'd personally arranged the entire situation. I'm going to teach them about dinosaurs and snow angels, and how to make Daddy read stories in funny voices. Adrian's laugh was watery and wonderful. He stood up, lifting Hazel with him, then reached for Emily with his free arm, pulling them both into a fierce embrace that felt like coming home. I love you, he whispered into Emily's hair. Both of you. All of you. I love our life and our chaos and the way Hazel puts jam on everything and how you sing off-key in the shower, and the fact that we're going to have another little person to love. Even though I sing off-key, Emily teased, though tears were streaming down her cheeks. Especially because you sing off-key, Adrian said seriously. It's one of my favorite sounds in the world. Later, after they'd dropped Hazel off at preschool, where she immediately announced to her teacher and anyone within earshot that she was going to be a big sister, Emily and Adrian drove to the park where they'd first begun rebuilding their relationship. The playground looked different in spring, with cherry blossoms creating a canopy of pink and white overhead. They sat on the same bench where Emily's mother had watched Adrian learn to push Hazel on the swings, but now they were different people occupying the same space. Are you scared? Emily asked, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Terrified, Adrian admitted, but the good kind of scared. The kind that means something matters so much you can't bear the thought of messing it up. We won't mess it up, Emily said with more confidence than she felt. We'll probably make mistakes, but we won't mess it up. We're different now. Stronger. Adrian took her hand, his thumb tracing the simple gold band she'd been wearing for 6 months now. Not an engagement ring, but a promise ring, a symbol of their commitment to building something lasting at their own pace. Emily Carrington, he said with mock seriousness, you've made me the happiest man alive. Twice now. Just wait until you're changing diapers again, Emily warned, but she was smiling. I can't wait, Adrian said, and Emily could tell he meant it. As they sat in the sunshine watching other families navigate the eternal chaos of playground diplomacy, Emily thought about the Christmas Eve when everything had changed. How lost they'd all been. She and Adrian circling each other's pain like wounded animals. Hazel, innocent of the complicated adult emotions swirling around her. Now Hazel was secure in the knowledge that both her parents loved her fiercely, that their house was full of laughter and bedtime stories, and the kind of gentle chaos that came from being truly, completely wanted. She was thriving in preschool, making friends with the confidence of a child who had never doubted her worth. And Emily had found something she'd never thought possible. Love that didn't require her to disappear. Partnership that celebrated her strength instead of diminishing it. A future that felt like choice rather than compromise. What are you thinking about? Adrian asked, noting her faraway expression. Christmas, Emily said. How different everything is now. Better? Emily considered the question seriously, looking at their joined hands, thinking about the life growing inside her, picturing Hazel's face when she'd announced her big sister status to the world. So much better, she said finally. Even the scary parts. They drove home through the tree-lined streets of the neighborhood they'd chosen together, close enough to Emily's parents for regular Sunday dinners, far enough from Adrian's old penthouse to feel like entirely new territory. Their house was modest by Adrian's previous standards but perfect for their growing family. A front porch where Hazel could draw with sidewalk chalk, a backyard big enough for a swing set, windows that let in enough light for Emily's art studio. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Adrian helping Hazel navigate the complex engineering required to eat spaghetti without wearing most of it, Emily's phone rang with a call from her sister Maya. "I just had to call and congratulate my favorite brother-in-law." Maya's voice carried clearly through the speaker. "How did you?" Emily began, then looked at Hazel, who was grinning with the satisfaction of someone who'd successfully shared exciting news. "I might have called Aunt Maya," Hazel admitted without remorse. "You might have, huh?" Adrian laughed, wiping sauce from Hazel's chin. "What else might you have done while Mama and I were at the store?" "I might have drawn a picture of our family with the new baby," Hazel said proudly. "Want to see?" The picture was taped to the refrigerator, stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, with a tiny figure labeled baby nestled between the larger ones. It wasn't sophisticated art, but it captured something essential about the love that had rebuilt itself from hope and forgiveness, and the simple determination to do better. Later, after Hazel had been tucked into bed with her stuffed reindeer Rudolph and a new bedtime story about brave princesses and helpful dinosaurs, Emily and Adrian stood in the nursery they'd begun converting from Emily's art studio. "We'll need to move my easel," Emily said, though she didn't sound upset about it. "Or we could add on," Adrian suggested. "Build you a proper studio in the basement with better light and more space." "Adrian," Emily said gently, "we don't need to renovate the house every time our lives change. Some things are worth adapting to." It was a small moment, but Adrian heard the larger truth in it, that love sometimes meant flexibility rather than control, accommodation rather than reconstruction. He was still learning the difference, but Emily was a patient teacher. "You're right," he said, kissing the top of her head. "We'll figure it out as we go." "We always do," Emily agreed. As they prepared for bed, following the comfortable routines they'd developed over months of learning to share space again, Emily caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back was someone she'd never imagined becoming. A mother of two, a partner in a relationship built on equality rather than need, an artist who'd found ways to create even in the midst of beautiful chaos. "Do you ever wonder," she asked Adrian as they settled into bed, "what would have happened if Camilla hadn't invited me to that Christmas party?" Adrian was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I think we would have found each other eventually," he said finally. "Maybe not that night, maybe not that way, but I think Hazel would have brought us together somehow. She's magic like that." "You really believe that?" "I have to," Adrian said simply, "because the alternative, that I might have missed this, missed her, missed getting to love you both the way you deserve, that's too terrible to imagine." Emily curled against his side, her hand finding its way to rest over his heart, feeling the steady rhythm that had become as familiar as her own. Outside their bedroom window, the city sparkled with the lights of other families, other love stories, other people figuring out how to build lives worth living. But inside their small corner of the world, everything was exactly as it should be. The last thing Emily remembered before sleep claimed her was the sound of Adrian's breathing evening out, and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but they would face them together, all of them, the family they'd chosen to become despite everything that had tried to keep them apart. Some love stories began with meet-cutes and grand gestures, but the best ones, Emily had learned, were built one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time with patience and forgiveness and the revolutionary act of choosing each other, again and again, until it became as natural as breathing. Would you have made the same choice Emily did, to let Adrian back into their lives despite the risk of disrupting the stability she'd fought so hard to build? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.